All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. This is the second part of the podcast featuring Mike Stutz, the Hollywood director, writer, producer. They call that showrunner now. We were talking about reality TV and the responsibility of those who make content for other people. This includes things like the video games we create here in Silicon Valley, what their responsibilities are. He's giving us a little look inside what happens behind the scenes or what goes on with reality TV. We finished the last episode with him telling us what the question was. So this is the Something Venture podcast. In this podcast, I explore the reality behind the Silicon Valley headlines as I sit down with the movers and shakers, the up-and-comers who are changing the way we view the world online and beyond. This is Beyond. This is the Hollywood edition. Mike Stutz, part 2. Mike, tell us, what was that question?
The question would be, and I think one of the questions of this podcast, if I recall correctly, would be, as that behavior becomes more and more extreme or continues to be extreme, does that change the way that people view what is okay behavior? That over and over studies do show that stuff that you view on TV, people will mimic, especially younger people will mimic what's going on. And a good example would be, and of course I don't have this on firsthand knowledge, but I hear from very, very good sources that a lot of those caught on tape shows, it always disappoints people when I say this, but a lot of the caught on tape shows, even the ones that were big in the 90s, and I won't rename specific ones, but that where the guy is peeing in the coffee pot, or you won't believe what happened in the storeroom, or you won't believe what they do to the burrito, or whatever.
Like the guy spits in the sandwich.
Right, it's always spitting or some sort of thing, or someone's having sex and then they clean up and then they serve you something, or that kind of thing. Those are all fake. Those are clips that's
crazy. I feel like I should be able to sue somebody.
I know, absolutely,
is there
and they'll deny it certainly. There's a plausible deniability that the network doesn't ask. Like, where did these clips come from? It doesn't matter. And they're all blurred, so of course you wouldn't know whose face that is. So,
and I guess there's no litigant. Like, who's gonna? I'm suing you.
Because there's no.
I base my life on.
You're not seeing McDonald's. If you notice, look at the shots here. If it's real, okay, you're not seeing. And sometimes they'll blur out stuff, even though it doesn't need to be blurred, so it looks like it must be a McDonald's, when in fact there's no sign there. But a lot of those, I won't say they're all fake because I don't know. I don't work for all of them. I don't work for any of them actually. But again, I have very good sources. You might recognize me from some. That they will. They create this, right? And it's entertaining, and you go, oh my god. And this especially was even before the internet age. This was in the 90s. This was popular shows, and I'm not talking about like America's Funniest Home Videos. I have no idea if all those are real or not. But so this happens, and you see the guy pee in the coffee pot every 2 weeks and all those things. Do you reach a point where this is something that probably never happened? It probably no one did it. Or if so, it was so rare. But now if you see it all the time, you talk about it, does it then become acceptable? Does that become, I hate my coworkers, therefore I pee in the coffee pot? And I think there's something to that. And it's something that you have to at least be aware of. And the example then, so this spurs really internet stuff, where all these clips you see on YouTube and yes, many of them are things that happen. I'm sure there's a lot of real stuff. Some of them are fake. And others of them, I think, are the exception, not the rule. That this person's behavior is not the way most people behave. But of course, it's very entertaining, so it gets 10 million hits or 100 million hits. And does that then mean that in life it is unlikely, though not impossible, that you spend a lot of time throwing wine in people's faces and storming outdoors?
I rarely see a drink get thrown in a face in the real world.
When do you see that, right? But, of course, on Desperate Housewives or, Real Housewives, you see that all the time. You see that, like, two ladies tackle each other over the couch and that kind of thing. Now, that isn't necessarily a producer saying you have to do this. I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it is casting to people who are maybe have a tendency toward that behavior anyway. Probably feeding them a fair amount of alcohol. keeping them in a false environment where people are feeding them, oh, can you believe they said this, whether or not they did. Producers asking them questions. She called you fat. Like, that doesn't seem very cool. Well, did she really call you fat, or are we just saying that? And you put all these things together, and you get wine in the face, and you get ratings. But do you have any responsibility that you're making the world a dumber, meaner, more poorly behaved place? Do you? Is it? I think one of the great myths out there, and I think it's true probably from a lot of different companies, there's all these kind of cliches about what kind of people do these things, or what kind of people make TV. And I've seen movies that are trying to portray reality producers, and they're these kind of mean-spirited or incredibly stupid, well, let's do this and let's do that, and let's, we're ha 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 ha. Right. I will tell you that, having worked in several different fields in TV, but one of them being reality, some of the nicest, smartest, best educated people I've worked with work in reality television. They're not bad people. Right. There's no individual. I mean, now it's changing a little bit because people have now grown up in reality, so they actually go into it because they love reality. But in general, my experience has been there isn't the evil man or woman saying, do this, let's exploit this talent. Yeah. It's a bunch of, if not well-meaning, a bunch of nice people, smart people, who go, well, this is entertaining and that's entertaining, and they lose perspective a little bit. Right. And I'm not saying they have any responsibility, and I shouldn't say they. We have any responsibility. That, look, you want to watch it, it goes on the air. But at what point do you become, the cigarette company? At what point do you have some responsibility in saying, wait, we're putting this out into the world? Do we have to do anything about it? Do we have to throw a disclaimer up saying this is not real?
So let me ask you. I think I know the answer. So I just won't even ask you the question.
Okay,
that's good podcasting.
Thank you very much.
In Silicon Valley, your companies get criticized for putting out video games, the super violent video games, where you're killing people at the rate of like hundreds per hour. Yeah. I'm not sure what the conclusion has been, but it seems like that people don't. There doesn't seem to be an actual narrative of people watching video games, going out and replicating them and killing people.
I'd be interested in companies that do those games, whether they are actually looking into that. And I don't know the answer, but whether they care. I'm saying, should you care? Should you actually research whether or not your cigarettes are killing people? Yeah. That should you actually put money into, hey, is there a way to do this game that maybe doesn't influence people, and is there a way to do it that does influence people, and do we care? And I would say that yes, the odds of making the jump from playing a video game to picking up a handgun and shooting someone in the head, that's a huge commitment to do something like that. Now, peeing in a coffee pot or throwing a drink in someone's face is not as big a jump.
I think that makes sense, because if you play a video game, you're like, I'm not a 40-foot tall robot. Right. I don't actually have a submachine gun that weighs like 500 pounds. Right. Like, I could see where you're more like, okay, there's a difference. But yeah, I have glasses of wine. I have a door that I could slam in your face. Like, nobody slams a door in anybody's face. Right.
But not enough. Well, also though, when you get into things like internet addiction, and I guess the parallel I see maybe between some internet companies and media companies of various kinds is that it's not a total leap to say, hey, we want people to come to our site more, and we can addict them to our site. Right. And is that addiction, do we have any responsibility at all to say, like, maybe you should do other things too? Or do you not? And I don't have the answer. I'm not saying that you necessarily do, but it is, I mean, it's not the road to hell being paved with good intentions, because I'm not sure how many good intentions are there. Right. But if you know that your site, you know the field a lot better than I do, but you know that like a lot of pedophiles are using your site to exchange pictures, and you know that like, hey, and I think a lot of times the response is, that happens, but that's not our, hey, we didn't do that. People just figured out a way to use it. Or yes, the Arab Spring happens with Twitter, and that's great, but what else is happening with Twitter that's not so great? And if you're going to tout one, if you're going to say, hey, and I'm not, again, addressing Twitter, but if you're going to tout one and say, hey, we do this, look at how we free information, look at how we allow people to communicate, then I think you have to be honest about the other and say, what are we doing that's not so great? Right. And I think in TV too, there does come a point where you at least personally have to take, at least don't be full of shit. At least admit, hey, okay, I'm doing this. Don't try and pretend that everything's fantastic. And yeah, there are bad people out there and bad things happen. But hey, because that's how... That's how things go wrong, is no one taking any responsibility. Yeah. I didn't do it. Yeah. And that's how, like, the post office or the government or whatever. Right. It's not like evil people getting together. It's just a lot of... I don't know why I picked the post office. Yes, those guys. You're fine. Please deliver my mail. Please deliver my mail. We
like you guys. You're nice.
As is the government. Please don't follow me.
Yeah.
But it isn't... I rarely is it a bunch of evil people coming together with a plan.
Yeah.
It's just... Absolutely. Not taking responsibility. Yeah. And if you are in a business that we both are, where you are putting together, you are influencing millions of people. I always like the fact that why do people think Hollywood people are douchebags? Because we wrote scripts about Hollywood douchebags. And people go like, well, like all the agents do this and all the stars do this.
Right.
No. You're getting that from us. Right. Like we wrote that. Actually, most agents aren't like that. You know, most of them are just kind of boring lawyers.
Right.
Yes, there is an actual Ari out there who is a little like Jeremy Piven's character.
Right.
But that is again an exception, not a rule.
Yeah.
You know.
There's a porn version of this too. Like I can't articulate.
There's always a porn version.
Yeah. Well, there's the thing that a lot of the Silicon Valley things start with the porn industry. They're the innovators. Storage, video streaming, all those.
Of course. Yeah, porn
things.
Drives. Yeah, is the innovator. Yeah.
So
yeah, sure.
But there's a version too of the video violence that porn is causing something. I forget what it is in relationships.
Pleasure, happiness.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
it's something like expectations are misaligned of what a relationship.
Well, I think it definitely is. It's so accessible now. It is just so massively accessible. That it's interesting. I mean, one of the byproducts, and there are many. Not that I know any. I haven't seen porn in forever. I don't know, but
I don't know. You can get that on the internet. Is there a website? Is there a website you can recommend?
I haven't the slightest clue. But from what I hear,
on the web,
people. I mean, now, and I won't make this sort of a dirty show, but now the norm is a certain amount of shaving downstairs, shall we say? Right. That comes from porn.
Right.
I worked on a show many years ago on Showtime. Speaking of responsibility, called Family Business, that was followed people who worked in the adult industry. So yes, it was not, we were not doing adult stuff, but we were on sets where they were, and it was a comedy. There's a great example though. Showtime always thought of it as a comedy, and they always wanted to approach it as a comedy, but it's like, well, people are watching this to, masturbate. They're not watching this to be entertained. But we would have to take notes as if like, this scene's not funny enough. It's like, this scene is just the filler before we get to the next naked scene.
The comic structure of this just makes no sense.
But porn, people would shave so that you could see their genitals better. And that's just a porn thing. And now porn influenced, of people to say like, oh God, there can be no hair down there. And again, it's outside of my area of expertise. But I'd have to say that with the mass of self-shot video and pictures and all those things, and this sort of very meat markety feeling of the Tinder type stuff, that you do kind of fall into a porn-influenced world where you are boiled down to, this is, hot or not, and present yourself in a way that basically someone with a porn chat room would present themselves. And that influence, I don't think you can discount the wild domination of porn out there, both on the internet and on television. I mean, there's so many more shows that are somehow related to kind of a soft porny thing that, back in the day, it would be like, bad soft porn with the stuff cut out on USA, like at midnight. But now it's, it's all over the place. So I don't have a great point on it, but nor do I on anything really.
Well, if you look at kind of working our way back to reality, but if you look at the three, I think what I've heard from women in particular about porn is it's creating different understanding, like a wrong understanding of what an intimate relationship should look like.
Sure. I guess the hookup, right? And again, we can sound like two old guys when she started like, oh, now kids are just hooking up. Like, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert in the dating field. But yes, the hookup, I assume, is kind of where you're going. And that...
Well, and so you have this sort of like, if there was a disclaimer for the porn sites to be like, this is not indicative of an intimate relationship, of the violent video games, like you should not go, like... So it seems obvious with not obvious with the porn, obvious with the violent video games. Like you shouldn't go get a tank and go blow up orcs if they come into your neighborhood.
Well, you should blow up orcs.
The maybe minor distinction on the reality is that you're creating something and telling people it's real that's not.
Yeah.
In the first case.
Yeah.
But the second thing, it's behavior that you are pretty close to. Like you're pretty close to, like, I have a coffee pot and I'm angry at you and I could
yes, exactly. It looks kind of like your life, but not exactly like your life.
Yeah, so you might be more prone. So it may be that reality does make us a crasser, more prone to drama group of people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it can take all the responsibility, but there is, with any sort of entertainment, it's amazing the influence you have. It's amazing. And I'm not so arrogant to think that, shows that I do, people care about on any level. It's more the mass of it that if you're watching those shows, and there are people who watch a lot of shows like that, and it's constantly coming at you, I have to think that it has some influence. And the challenge is, the bummer is, I've actually done shows. I mean, there's a show in particular, there's a few that I can think of, but I've worked very hard to work on shows, not all the time, some of them will suck, that can make a good difference. And I did a show that I was very proud of, which I don't remember if I talked about it on the last time, so maybe I'm just telling the same story, but was starring Master P. And the pilot had to do with getting a guy who had lived the gang lifestyle out of that, getting him work, getting his family out of a tough neighborhood, helping him to turn things around. Master P was unbelievable to work with. He was great. And he was very committed to it. He was a rapper and mogul and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know now what he's worth, but he's worth a lot personally. And he wanted to do something. It was called No Excuses, and we did it for VH1. And some of the top people at VH1, one of their top guys, like cried on an airplane watching it. It was one of those shows. You went, this is funny and this is meaningful. And we really did something. Chef Jeff came on it and undercover and helped this guy learn how to, he had, some culinary skills and we got a scholarship to a really good culinary school and all sorts of stuff. And it had drama. It was funny. It was really compelling. I was very proud of it. The network, even though it was nothing like what was on VH1, said, we want to put this on because we want to be able to sleep at night, that we want shows that are going to make a good positive difference. And it went up, and Twitter was a bunch of people going like, who the hell's Master P? Like, that guy's old. And nobody watched. So it was not wine in the face, and people said, where's my wine in the face? And there are other shows that I've done that have fallen into the same thing. I tend to, if anything, I'm, again, making sure that I never work again. If anything, I tend to convince people or help convince people, let's do this in a way that even though we'll have all the elements, but it'll still be a good thing. It'll still like contribute something to the world we live in. You won't be embarrassed about it. You'll be able to sleep. And over people are like, not watching. Wine in the face. Give me my wine in the face.
It's tough to argue with that. Like when you're in a business where you get results. I lived in Chicago, and the stock traders are like that. Like they don't really bullshit you. They're like, I think the yen's going up against the dollar, and the next day, if it doesn't, they lose like $1 million. So they tend not to say shit like, in Silicon Valley, things don't happen for 5 years. So people are like, well, I'll be wearing Google Glass in like 8 years. And if we're not, like, who cares? Right? Nobody remembers.
Yeah, I mean, generally the story about the television exec is, that idiot, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But usually it may not be what you want to hear. As a producer, you may not want to hear, hey, more wine in the face. But why don't we see her boobs more? But, and I'm not saying I've gotten that specific note, but I wish that would be a great note. I've gotten some somewhat similar to that. But there is a reason they say, people are going to watch this or are not going to watch this, and usually they're pretty good at predicting it. Not always, but usually they're pretty good, and rarely is it the really informative, enlightening, positive show that draws the big ratings. And it makes me sad. And I don't know. I think there is a way to do it. And whether or not there's a way to do it, do you just have a responsibility to try to do it? To try to say like, hey, let's not exploit this situation. Let's not, did you just yawn on air? No, I'm in the middle of talking and I hear a yawn.
I don't think
you heard that out there. Yeah, rewind and listen right there. Like,
the problem is too, I don't know how to edit.
Wait, that sound you hear is Kent falling.
What the hell is going on?
Stay tuned. Mike's on his old saw about changing the world.
So what is the answer for the reality that's being created, either completely created or pushed through, alcohol or whatever?
Yes.
Doing things that people might mimic. Is there a responsibility? Is there you should either try to do something better. That seems a little unrealistic, or you should at least caveat it in a certain way, or is it just like, hey, that's how that's gonna?
I don't know. I mean, I think you can run the equivalent of somehow like to sell out or not to sell out. Like in some ways, if you're going to do it, some would say the answer is, look, if you're going to do some evil, just go ahead and do the evil. Like don't go halfway. Right, just do it. You know, if you're going to sell out big. Get a bigger house. And I'm torn. I think that probably the business person in me would say, you're overestimating what you don't make a difference. Just get the shot, get the shot, get the best you can, get people see it and let them make the decision. Yeah. I think that's fair. I'm not sure. And probably this is just my own ego. I think that you have to look at some situations and say, yes, I could exploit this. Yeah. Yes, I could break this person in this interview and probably screw them up pretty badly, but get a little better television. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to let this go. Yeah. And maybe I'm not going to put on the air something that's going to humiliate them for the rest of their life for something that maybe doesn't make a difference. Like, it's not going to change my ratings one way or the other. Do I need this moment to be there? And do we have some responsibility? I'd like to think that given that opportunity, I would take the high road. Yeah. But again, like if anything, I am an example of how not to do it. I mean, I think that there are people out there who definitely say, push them. And I'm not saying that I haven't had my moments. I mean, even in the Master P show, I remember doing an interview with the main guy and really pushing him and getting him to break and cry. Right. And I was sort of browbeating him with questions till he got to that point. My logic was, we need the dramatic moment to play the idea. We need him my audience to feel he has broken down here and now he's going to see the light. Yeah. I don't know. Is it like, was that the way that it had to happen? Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't feel too bad about it because the show turned out fine. His life turned out fine. So it's all good. But if if he had gone down, like if he'd run off the set and disappeared or something like that, would I have bore some responsibility? Yes. Yeah. I guess that's it. You just have to take some responsibility. Right. No matter what you're doing, whether you're running Twitter or whether you're running Nuzzle or whether you're running a television show, you have to be conscious of what you're doing. Right. And just don't be full of shit. Yeah. Like, just accept the fact that, like, yes, this is happening and I can make this decision or that decision. But so many people pass the buck. Yeah. And that bugs the hell out of me. Yeah. Is the idea that, well, what could I do? I had no idea. Well, sure you did. Yeah. You're not dumb. You know what's going on, and maybe you do or do not have influence. Maybe no one cares about your company. No one cares about your television show. Yeah. But that still does not exonerate you and say, yes, do whatever you want. Yeah. Because these are human beings that you're talking about, and this is a world you have to live in. Right. So I would hope that you can both entertain people and take some level of responsibility. Yeah. Or, if you're evil, to say like, okay, well, I am evil. I acknowledge that. Yeah. And we talked about that the last time we talked about don't call yourself a starving artist if you're not a starving artist. Don't be a jackass. Right. Leave that to the starving artist.
Don't be a jackass.
Don't be a jackass is good advice. Not always followed by me. That is for sure. Right. But
that's a pretty good note to end on, but what happens next time?
Let's keep going.
But it'd be better, like, we need Emmy predictions. We need
well, that more dates the show. It's got to be evergreen. We got to be able to listen to the show
every year. So
I predict a Silicon Valley sweep.
Silicon Valley sweep.
People now 5 years from now. What was Silicon Valley?
That was a thing.
Wait, apes didn't always run this planet? I don't understand.
The robot overlords.
I wouldn't have the slightest clue. Not only can I not get nominated for an Emmy, I wouldn't have the slightest clue who's going to win the Emmy.
So is anything happening in reality? Are there any trend that's like I don't watch it? Is like a certain type or the Bachelorette things ascending? Or
it is interesting.
Making fun of Southerners becoming a bigger thing? I mean,
some of the business that I'm in now is more and more recreations, which is interestingly then moving back to scripted.
Yeah.
Where you tell a story, someone tells you a story about a subject, and then actors are playing it. And it used to be recreations would be, George Washington, was a industrious young man, and we see George Washington's back walking down the hall, but no dialogue.
Right.
But now more and more, you're seeing bigger and bigger scenes where actually things like History and Discovery and TLC are doing, someone will say, hey, this happened. In my case, I'm doing shows that are, pretty light and sort of goofy stories, but they're also doing it with industrialists and presidents and really coming back to scripted television.
Yeah.
But doing it with non-union because it's still a reality, right? So you go, okay, well now George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are going to have a 2-minute conversation after a historian does an interview.
Right.
And then, and some of those shows may be union shows, but it is interesting that you get to the point where you might as well have an actor. If you're going to fake a show, then you might as well have actors because they'll do it better.
Right.
So you I think I don't know if it's a trend or not, but I think that there's a certain amount of acknowledgement of hey, we've just been using people who can't act.
Right.
So why don't we put more actors back on? Right. And then that's where the unions will get involved and say hey, wait a minute, this is now a scripted show. And that is the big battle that'll be happening. So I think the very interesting thing, I do not know how it will resolve, will be the union issue when it comes to reality television and what does it mean? That whether or not it becomes more unionized, in which case it becomes more expensive, in which case you'll actually see less reality television,
right?
Or whether it stays what it is. And some people out there would say, well, TV's breaking up anyway, so pretty soon it's going to be, 2 24-year-olds with a camera and their other 3 buddies, and that's going to be what you watch on Hulu or on some platform that I've never heard of, but other people are watching, and and that that is certainly possible. I don't think, much like the last conversation. Excuse me for a second. I don't think television is going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm not too worried.
It's going to be here in some way, shape, or form. But no, there has been a flattening off of reality numbers because there's such a saturation of shows. So now you've got 6 different pawn shows. How many shows about pawn shop? Shows that we used to laugh about and fake pitch.
Yeah.
Then we said, wouldn't it be funny if this were on television?
Yeah.
Are now on television. The idea of a show about meter maids would have been ludicrous 10 or 12 years ago. You would have been like, that's hilarious. But then it's going into whatever season it's going into, and you either get these really high concept shows where it's, okay, well, they're people of little people, they're little people, but they work in construction. And they work on skyscrapers, little people, high skies, we pitch that. But, so you've got this total inundation of reality. So the shows still get pretty good numbers, but there's so many shows that it kind of levels off. And so there was an article pretty recently about that there is the search for the next big hit because it's been a while since there's been that everyone's talking about it. Right. Jersey Shore was like that. Honey Boo Boo is like that, where apparently that's the theme of this week is Honey Boo Boo, which is now not so much like that. But where the president's talking about it, and where it's just in the zeitgeist, and that show. I mean, I guess obviously Duck Dynasty was one, but then they had trouble with their actors, right? With getting their real life entangled with their faux life. I mean, you want to see a good scripted reality show? Look at Duck Dynasty. I mean, that there's that they are entertaining, interesting guys in their own way. But all of those scenarios are false. None of those things occur in their life. They are real people who do a real thing. Yeah. But they do not have, oh my God, Jeff Gordon's come to town and we've got to run a race. And yet I think that was an episode. If it wasn't Jeff Gordon, it was someone. And so, yes, how do you get a hit in reality television is, my friend Danny's got a show he's been pitching forever that he's still got a possible buyer. He wants to to do. Maybe I shouldn't reveal this on the air. Maybe that's not good. I'm not sure what kind of secrecy we have at this point.
Just change the,
a show where they stop his heart for a certain amount of time.
Oh, boy.
And there's a ambulance on one side of the stage and a hearse on the other. And we bring him back. Like, have we gotten to that point, where, but he's willing to do it himself. But I really hope I didn't just like give away a secret there. But it's been out there a long time.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that no one, don't steal that idea. He's a good man. I think I've done a terrible thing. But
I can't imagine anyone else taking that and running with it with a passion.
But have we gotten to like life and death? And we'll start, like, all right, well, this week, and I guess that's all the satires of reality, or what it is, that kind of
Running Man,
Katniss and Running Man, that now we're going to kill each other, we're going to kill ourselves. And I'm sure I did used to think, well, reality television will do okay until we kill someone. Yeah. But then now we have, like I think the French Survivor, someone died.
Okay.
Wipeout has had some terrible injuries.
There was a suicide done.
A lot of suicides.
Bachelor. Yeah, but that wasn't.
There's a lot of suicides with reality actors, which is a bad thing. I throw that out there, like, a lot of suicides. I mean, yes, a terrible thing. Yeah. Murders. There's been murders of ex-reality stars. I mean, somewhat that's just society. You're going to have a certain amount of people who do stuff. Yeah. But especially if you have volatile, often narcissists. Yeah. You're people who may or may not be completely stable. But no, they have had now a couple of incidents where people have died during the filming of a show,
right? Yeah.
And it still doesn't seem to bother anyone. That it just kind of goes on. And talk about responsibility. Like, if you're doing a show, and I have never, knock wood, had it happen on a show that I'm doing, but I have friends who've done shows that have almost killed people because oftentimes the safety on a set is limited, that maybe there's a paramedic or something, but there's not always a safety officer. Right. And you're doing stuff that producers are making up. Right. They're saying, oh, this is a competition and this will happen. But where you go, like, wait a minute, we didn't think of that. Yeah. I mean, there's a show I can think of, I won't name the show, but the star was known as like a real outdoors guy. Yeah. And so it was like an outdoor competition, and he was bossing him around, and he had a chainsaw. And normally a chainsaw has a safety on it, and it's not going to cut your leg off, but you can screw it up. Yeah. And he was swinging that chainsaw around and just about chopped his leg off. And this is a celebrity who slammed it into his leg, and he had a deep gash. Wow. And it was like, oops, right. You're like, didn't think of that. Yeah. And I've heard of other times when people have almost given someone hypothermia, different things where a bunch of producers sitting around just didn't wrap their head around it. And how can you look at a show like Wipeout and not expect that there's going to be torn ligaments and broken backs and things? And that does happen.
Yeah, some pretty bad injuries.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, they're doing very physically taxing things. And I believe, I do not know this to be fact, but I believe there was a gentleman who died of a heart attack running the course of Wipeout. And that is not terribly surprising because it's a very rigorous course. Yeah. And you have people who may not be in very good shape, and they want to do their best. Yeah. And, if they were playing basketball in the park, they might also have a heart attack.
Or running a marathon for the first time.
But again, we'll just go back to like whether it's the internet or television, do you have responsibility? Should you look at a contestant and say, is this person physically able to get through this course without having something really, really bad happen to them? Yeah. And yes, he's hilarious, and he's a big nerd, and he's got a beer gut, and all those things. But do you have for some responsibility? And I sound like the babysitter nation of like, let's put warnings on everything. I'm not saying that, but you have to go home at night and say, I asked that guy to run the course. Yes, it was his decision. No, you're not responsible for his death. Yeah. But did you do everything you could to make sure that you were safe? And I'm not calling out Wipeout. I don't work on it. I don't know people who do. I don't, that. Yeah. But whatever it is, whatever your show is there, and I have done shows with stunts, and you do have. But I got asked actually years back to do I was in the running to do a pretty crazy stunt show, and the idea was that you recreated stunts that happen in music videos, and you would do them like on a set. And I'm sure they had safety officers and all those things. But I did not get the job, but I almost got the job. Yeah. And me running that show was a ridiculous idea because I don't know a damn thing about stunts. And maybe that's why I didn't get it. Yeah. Maybe the guy was a stunt coordinator, but I bet he wasn't. Yeah. I bet that he was a producer who went like, oh, this would be cool, and how do we do this? And that's great. Yeah. You're like, wow, we're going to shoot someone off a train, and what should we? Anyway, does everyone know what they're doing? Are we good?
I've got to see that show.
Yeah. Oh, it was a good one. It was I think it was on MTV or VH1.
Right.
It was probably now 10-ish years ago. And it was a really cool show. Yeah, it was very cool. That would have been fun to work on, but I would have killed someone. So, and I did actually turn one show down that I guess I can't name the show. So the scenario won't make sense. But I did turn a show down because I thought someone's going to die.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I got asked to be a showrunner on a show. Show is now in its 7th season. No one's died. Everyone's happy, and they probably were the luckier for it that I didn't take the job.
Yeah.
But I did think someone's going to die on the show. I don't want that on my head.
Yeah.
And then the irony will be, I'll do this interview, and it'll be downloaded thousands of times after someone dies on my set. After just some stupid comedic recreation. Some guy falls down a chimney and kills himself. And like, who was the executive producer?
Yeah.
Like, oh,
the guy who meant well and talked a big game.
Yeah, well, I guess karma came back, buddy.
Yeah. Well, I think
let's not end on that. Oh God! Anything else? Just ask me something.
More Emmy predictions.
Jessica Alba. She's gorgeous. I've seen her
as a write-in candidate. Jessica Alba will come back.
She is very beautiful. Yeah. Let's put that image in people's head to finish up.
Exactly.
Our lesson for this week: Jessica Alba is lovely, isn't she?
My lesson for this week is that I guess you knew that those things were scripted and put together, but not to the extent that surprises me a little bit. That's my takeaway.
Well,
but not a lot.
All of my shows are absolutely real,
other
so
than
I have
your shows,
no
of course.
idea what that would be like. But I hear, it would be how would you have the time if I just filmed you every day,
right,
and allowed your life to happen? It would be tedious. It would be like the 1971 PBS thing. Not that much interesting happens in your life. It's not as much as people say, you should come to my office. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. No, it's not. Your joke's not that funny.
Right.
It's not that great. And so it's like, it happens by little measures. You're like, well, let's just goose that answer a little bit. And let's goose that. And let's put an obstacle in the way of, okay, well, what if they painted the door shut and now we can't get out? And you just start adding those things. But after a while, because we painted the door shut, we have to explain who the painter was. Well, the painter actually would be funnier if we had an actor play it or, whatever. And it just kind of keeps adding up. And again, some shows don't do that.
Yeah.
Some shows do. You can watch the show, but generally my thing is look at things like camera placement. If something crazy happens and the camera's in exactly the right spot, I'm going to guess they knew that thing was going to happen. The other thing would be network approval. How do you get something approved if you don't know what's going to happen? Right. And the network's going to ask, like, well, what happens on the show? Okay, we've got 4 guys who live in Alaska. And if you're crabbing off Alaska, I honestly don't know with that show whether anything's set up or not. I haven't watched those shows enough to really know. I could watch it in about 5 minutes and tell you if stuff's fake or not. But it's pretty dangerous, and you probably don't want to put people in a situation where you're like, what if you've gotten the dinghy and those kind of things. But I'm sure there's at least some goosing with interviews or something. And probably not like, I don't know, whale watch, that whale wars and stuff like that. That's a pretty important subject. So I would guess that they don't want to give fake answers. And so, it varies from show to show. But generally, where are your cameras? How good was the line? How good was the quip that person got out in their interview? And how clean was it? The other thing would be okay, let's say that you aren't scripting anything and you aren't structuring anything, which there are many shows out there that do not. The way you choose to edit it, I can put together the first end of one thing you said and the second end of something else you said. I could take this discussion we just had, and I could make it sound like I hate you, or I could make it sound like you're my best friend. Or and if I have visuals, I can just show other stuff that, like, okay, an example would be if this was a reality show. So we had a real moment where I called you and laughed at the fact that you yawned for a second. Now, if I was a reality producer and I was filming this, I would go, that's the moment. Like, let's make Mike insecure about the fact that Kent is bored with what he's saying, right? So now I'm going to do some backstory. So I'm going to maybe show Kent out partying the night before. I'm going to show him going to a club or something and looking at his watch because it's 3 a.m, it's 4 a.m, it's 5 a.m. So, okay, now we know why he's so tired. And I'm going to now, like, use... So, if I was scripting it, but even if I'm not,
Yeah.
I'll use that moment. I'll capture like you yawning, and there were probably moments before we started the interview where I'm just kind of looking off or looking out in the yard or something like that. And I'll use those as if I'm looking nervously around and I'm really upset that Kent's not. And then I'll maybe put in like 15 seconds of silence where it seems like there was dead air in the interview. And I can build with what exists here and make it into a story. Yeah. Now, is that real? Did that all happen? I'm not telling you or I to say anything.
Yeah.
I'm not using footage that I asked you to do anything. But does that mean it's real? Well, yeah, sure. Wow. You edited it that way, and you cut away to the cat, or you needle scratch if you're you put sound effects, you put music in. Put music into anything, and you'll change the mood.
Yeah.
So yes, I will walk back a little bit and say, like, yeah, there are a lot of shows that don't have a script going into it, but then the way that you cut it, is questionable. And the way you cut anything, I mean, even if you're doing a documentary on the American history, you can, who you choose to interview is going to influence whether or not Thomas Jefferson is the greatest guy in the world, or whether he's a terrible person who married his slave or should have married a slave, but instead like made his children serve him at the table. Those editorial choices you make create the reality. And yes, someone could research it, but more and more that is, people go, oh, it's on this network, therefore it's probably true. Yeah. Well, it's one person's version of that, and maybe it's right, or maybe it's more entertaining, and that's up to you to sort of figure it out, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
wow.
How about that, Jessica Alba?
That's good. That's good. Well, that's kind of a look behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, I know, really. Well, so much for me working.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I don't think so.
Yeah, shh, out there. Don't tell anyone this is on.
I think it's fascinating. Well, thank you for doing this.
Sure, my pleasure.
I know you're like, oh, this is just my job, and everyone else in the world's like, screw it, that's Hollywood. It's like, so cool.
Someone's asleep in their car.
You're like the magician in Hollywood telling people how it's done. You're like screwing it up for everyone else.
There's a lot of people who hate that magician. Yeah, that's. I know. Like, I almost got to do a show with Ricky Jay, who's a genius.
Yeah,
and he hates those shows that like I say as if he told me. I've read this somewhere. It's not like he shared this with me, but that expose tricks. He thinks that's the lowest form of magic that you would expose. So so I'm a traitor. Well, I haven't given away all the secrets. I could be way worse.
Yeah. But, plus everyone's heard this now. They're going to go watch reality and like, that's so cool.
Yeah,
I love that guy.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Anytime there's an obstacle or a well placed camera.
Yeah.
You tell me.
All right. Thanks for doing this. This has been the Something Ventured podcast. Thanks for listening.